Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ashley Brett, and oh boy, hold on one second. We're having a really bad echo. Sorry about that. We had a couple technical difficulties. My name is Ashley Brett. I am the program manager at the Department of State Hospitals, handling kind of the administrative side of the house for the DSH Diversion program. Welcome. We are here today to have a Round 3 RFA Opportunity Bidders webinar. So this is really an opportunity for us to walk you all through just the kind of high points of the application process, give you some tips and tricks, and then really to answer any questions that you may have out in the audience. So we will be running through some of these slides and with the plan of leaving time at the end for our Q&A. So just to give you a sense of what we'll be going through today, we're going to start off with just a really quick high-level overview of AB 1810 and WIC 4361, which is the bill and the statutory language that authorize specifically the DSH diversion program. Oh, we will have opening remarks first. Okay. That animation didn't work. We will be going through some key application components, and then we will have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. So we will start with some opening remarks from Chris Edens, the Deputy Director of the Forensic Services Division.
Well, thanks, everyone. Thank you, Ashley, and to Darcy also for coordinating today's bidders webinar. Really, this is going to be extremely short. Again, my name is Chris Edens. I'm the Deputy Director for the Forensic Services Division, and I partner with our department's medical director, Kate Warburton, and together we are working to help counties and partner with counties to implement pretrial felony mental health diversion programs. And so I really just wanted to take an opportunity to thank all of you in your counties for submitting an application to our Round 3 funding opportunity. We're incredibly excited that we can offer additional funding to implement these incredibly important programs, and obviously for your interest in wanting to stand up such a program. These are 3-year pilot programs, but we are hoping that through the implementation and the rollout of these programs, that there will be an opportunity to share all of the wonderful work and outcomes that stem from these programs and present them to decision makers, to the legislature, in hopes that ongoing funding and new opportunities will be available in the future to continue to extend as well as support these programs. So again, I just want to thank you for your time and for your effort. And with that, I'll just turn it right back over to Ashley.
All right, thank you, Chris. So before we move into our next session, I do want to just take a moment to introduce our third partner in crime here in the room with us, Dr. Darcy Delgado. She is a senior psychologist specialist who is working with us on the clinical aspects of this programming. Darcy, I don't know if you want to just say hi really quick.
Hi, everybody.
And she will be working with me through presenting these slides to you this morning. So we are going to start with just like I mentioned, a quick overview of AB 1810 and WIC 4361. So we like to talk about these as the big bubble and the little bubble. So the big bubble is Assembly Bill 1810 of 2018 and Senate Bill 215 of 2018. And those two bills created the broader framework for the diversion of individuals with serious mental disorders. And the language allowing, the statutory language allowing for these types of diversions can be found in Penal Code sections 1001.35 and Penal Code section 1001.36. So the broader AB 1810 and SB 215 establishes the legal authority to divert individuals, and it's a much broader framework than our specific WIC program, which I will talk about in just a few moments. The penal code sections listed here allow counties to divert individuals with the majority of diagnoses found in the most recent DSM, as well as folks who have been charged with either a misdemeanor or a felony. So there are a lot more, there's a much broader eligibility for clients under the two penal codes. WIC 4361 was also authorized through AB 1810 and SB 215, and it's a much smaller program. And this really, WIC 4361 outlines the DSH funding program. So for the DSH funding program, we target a much narrower set of eligibility criteria. We are only funding individuals who have a felony charge, who have very specific diagnoses, either schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or bipolar disorder. And we have $100 million to help counties stand up programs that are specific to those eligibility criteria. And we will, as we get a little bit further into this presentation, come back to talk a little bit more about the differences between what is allowed by the broader penal codes and what is allowed by the WIC code itself. So our next slide is really just a quick visual showing where diversion falls within the criminal justice behavioral mental health pathway. So here we have a sequential intercept model, which many of you may be familiar with, and we're highlighting where diversion falls. So this programming really falls in between intercepts 2 and 3, and that's because these programs are designed to redirect folks who have these mental illnesses away from the criminal justice system after they've been booked, but before they've gone to trial. Divert them away from trial and into treatment in the community. So our funding goals with our $100 million DSH diversion funds, first and foremost, we really want to be able to collect information and demonstrate what the most effective strategies are for treating individuals with these types of mental illnesses and a criminal justice background in the community. We also want to reduce our felony ISP referrals to the Department of State hospitals and really long-term integrate these people into longer-term care in the community to help break the cycle of recidivism and criminalization of folks with these serious mental illnesses. So our history leading to diversion. So California, like many other states in this country, have over the last decade or so seen an incredible increase in the number of ISTs that are being referred out of the courts and into state mental health systems. DSH is not or is part of that trend. And so just to give you an idea, in fiscal year 13-14, when we first kind of started to notice the spike in our IST referrals, we had, these are partial year numbers, from November to June, we had 1,859 referrals, IST referrals to the state hospital system. And at the end of that fiscal year, we had 386 individuals waiting for placement in one of our facilities, IST individuals waiting for placement into our facilities. For this current fiscal year, 19-20, we have information from July up through November of this year. And so far this year, we have had a total of 2,147 referrals, and our current average number of pending placements into our facilities right now is at about 825 and a half. So as you can see from these numbers, we've had a big jump in the number of folks who are being referred to us as IST, and unfortunately, the capacity that we have to serve those people cannot meet that demand. So some things that we have done over the last few years to try to meet the demands of this growing IST population is we have actually increased our bed capacity quite significantly since 2012-13. We have implemented program improvements that have reduced the average length of stay for IST individuals. We have launched a patient management unit that is a central source for directing referrals to the most appropriate facilities and really smoothing out that referral process. And we've also explored various legislative changes to help us serve this population better. One recent change is that I believe it's that ISTs can now only be served in the state hospitals for 2 years, whereas before it was 3 years. So again, trying to chip away at the length that folks are in our facilities for restoration purposes so we can open up those beds and bring more people in. But unfortunately, our increase in referrals has continued to outpace our ability to create more capacity. So before we go any further, we want to just talk a little bit about the demand or the research that we've done to try to understand this increase in demand. So I'm going to turn this over to Darcy to walk you through the next couple of slides.
Sure, thanks, Ashley. So again, just to kind of frame what we'll be talking about in the next few slides when we talk about some of the research, the reason why we were looking at this research is because we had a lot of questions asked of us as to why this increase in the number of IST referrals are happening and what can we do to better help this specific population of people coming in. And so what we ended up doing is looking at ISTs over a significant period of time. As you can see in the table in the upper left-hand quadrant, looking from fiscal year 9-10 through fiscal year 14-15. And so one of the questions that we often get is really, is the IST increase due to an increase in methamphetamine and opioid use through substance disorders? And the answer to that is no. As you can see from that yellowish line that's kind of close to the bottom, is that oftentimes the presence of that diagnosis is hovering anywhere from 5 to 9% and not really seeing any huge significant changes. But what you can see is that by primary diagnosis, the largest population of people coming into our facility are people who have a primary diagnosis of schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or bipolar disorder. Those three diagnoses being key are going to come up in other slides that you'll see today, because that is the population then that we will be targeting. Another question that was asked has to do with history of arrest. And as you can see in the upper right-hand quadrant slide, is that we are seeing an increase in the history of arrest that people are facing. And so a steady increase from 9-10 up to fiscal year 14. And so again, these clinical characteristics and the target population that we're looking at are not your first-time offenders. These are people who have chronic issues of involvement with the criminal justice system. More importantly, in the bottom left-hand quadrant, we were able to take a sampling of IST individuals who came into our hospitals as being found incompetent to stand trial and look to see if they accessed any kind of mental health services in the 6 months prior to them being arrested. So really trying to answer the question as to whether or not these ISTs are people who are connected to community mental health services. And what we found was, in fact, 47% did not access any kind of Medi-Cal benefits in the 6 months prior to leading up to their arrest, which means we now have a handful of people who have significant and chronic serious mental health disorders, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, and bipolar disorder, and those disorders are virtually untreated in the community. And in addition to being untreated for their mental illness, as you can see in the bottom right-hand quadrant, almost half of the ISTs coming into our hospitals are also homeless. And so what started to form, can we hit the next slide? What started to form, sorry, can you go back now? Was a picture of who these people are that are coming into our hospital system. And with a better picture of who these individuals are, we were able to create some of the language that could help target this population for DSH diversion. And so that population is a group of individuals who have a major mental illness with a psychotic feature, schizophrenia, schizoaffective, or bipolar disorder, that these are people who have a lengthy history of involvement with the criminal justice system, are untreated and not receiving medication for their mental illness, and are homeless and on the streets. And so in understanding this population, we were able to create a diversion program. And so as we move to the next slide, you'll be able to see a little bit of a comparison as to what this DSH diversion program looks like. And so the reason why we're showing this slide here is really threefold. One is to just better understand what the DSH diversion program does. Two, gives us a reference to what communities oftentimes know and understand a little bit better, which is competency-based restoration. And probably the third and most important piece has to do with your application for round 3 funding, in that we are looking for applications that speak to that third column, that speak to how we are creating a program with specific goals and what treatment is involved with that program so that DSH diversion money can be used. We've had a lot of questions come up in our round 1 and round 2 funding about how competency restoration is different from diversion. And so we'll take a minute to walk through this slide so that we're all on the same page to help understand the difference between the two. And so the first question that we ask ourselves is what is really the goal of this program? And in community-based competency restoration, and in addition, competency restoration when someone is in one of our state hospital beds, the goal of competency restoration is really to restore a person's ability to assist their counsel, to understand charges, and ultimately return to court to face their charges. And in some ways, what our DSH diversion program is trying to do is kind of put ourselves out of business, really, in that we're saying that when you send someone to us for competency restoration, us being the state hospitals, or if the person receives community-based competency restoration, it's really in some ways just a Band-Aid over a gaping wound. You're providing enough services just to get that person over the line where they can understand their charges and work with their lawyer. But there really is no connectivity to long-term treatment and long-term care. And so if you look under the goal of the program for DSH diversion, this is what we're actually trying to do and what we think are loftier goals and what people in our communities deserve, which is long-term community mental health treatment, and really the most important piece being engagement and connection to services for the long run, not just the short term of getting somebody able to work with their lawyer. And so aside from the goals of the programs really being different, the treatment in and of itself is different. When you are funding a community-based competency restoration program, or if someone is coming to DSH for competency restoration, there really are only two things that we provide: medication and education regarding the courts. That's it. Again, you can see how that in some ways that's kind of just a Band-Aid over a gaping wound. Whereas for the diversion program that hopefully you are creating and submitting to us is that those services and the treatment involved targeting the people that are in your program is much more well-rounded and holistic. You're providing housing, you're providing FACT team services, psychopharmacology, of course, because these are people with serious mental illness, and we know that getting medication on board is of utmost priority, but also those wraparound services that can keep someone successful in the community. And so hopefully you're starting to see the difference between that Band-Aid that we're providing for people's mental illness versus really giving them surgery for what they need and more extensive treatment. In addition, one big thing to recognize in a difference between restoring somebody's competency and someone successfully completing diversion is that at the end of competency restoration, somebody is still standing in front of the judge and facing their charges. In DSH diversion, once someone is successfully complete your program, per statutory language, the charges are dropped. We bring this up as an important thing to consider as you're writing your proposal to ensure that you're communicating that with all of your stakeholders and making sure that everyone is on the same page and understanding that once someone successfully completes, that their charges are dropped. And finally, can DSH diversion money be used for competency-based restoration? The answer to that is no. But instead, using those funds to fund different aspects of your diversion program will be the target of what we're talking about today. So as we talk about these things, a lot of the characteristics of this patient population and aspects of the treatment will be popping up in other subsequent slides. So what we're going to move to now is an overview of the application for funding, keeping in mind all of these statistics and targeted population that we just talked about. So Ashley is going to be talking about first some of the key components of the application.
All right, thanks, Darcy. So the key components of the application that we're going to go through today, and there are more components to the application than this, but these I think are some of the heavy hitters that you should pay particular attention to. The first one being demonstrated collaborative planning with your key county partners for this program, your description of your proposed local diversion plan, the budget details that we need to see, and then we'll talk a little bit about our data and outcomes reporting that are necessary for this program. So to start us off, demonstrated collaborative partnership. So the reason this is so important to your application is because this particular program and these particular clients or participants really touch so many different people within your county, from your courts, your DA, your PDs, or private defense attorneys, your county behavioral health potentially your probation department, your sheriff's office. There's lots of different players involved, particularly, given some of the details that may be in your particular county plan. So demonstrating to us that you have all of those people on board who you need to have on board so that your program can actually work, so that you can get referrals through the courts and into the program, so that you have whatever support you need from the county jail, if you need support from the county jail, so that we can truly see and understand that those folks are on board and are willing to support the program itself. And we are requesting or requiring that counties provide letters of support from each of the main partners that they list in their county plan. At a minimum, this should include your court, your DA, your public defender, if you have one. I know we've worked with some smaller counties that don't actually have a single public defender. So if that is a situation that you find yourself in, you can always email us some questions and we can have a one-off conversation about that. Perhaps your county behavioral health, perhaps your probation department, perhaps your sheriff's office, whoever is part of this planning and implementation team should be there should be a letter of support submitted from that particular entity. Next is your proposed diversion plan. So these are really kind of the key aspects that we'll want to see in detail within your proposed plan. So obviously, how are you going to identify the folks that you're bringing into your program? How are you going to treat them? What support services are you going to have? What type of housing is going to be available? So this is obviously a really hot button issue in California right now. We are in the midst of a housing crisis, and as Darcy mentioned in an earlier slide, we know that close to half of the folks that are coming through our doors are actually homeless and not receiving services. So housing is a really important piece of this, especially if you know that the population you're going to be targeting has a high prevalence of homelessness. So that is something that we will definitely be looking for. The number of clients, unduplicated clients that you feel your program can serve over the 3-year grant period, how long you think that they will stay in treatment. The law allows courts to order individuals into diversion for up to 2 years or 24 months. Some counties are just assuming that everybody who gets ordered into diversion will have a 24-month stay. Others have other lengths of stay based on previous experience with, say, their faxed contracts or other types of programming that they've done in the past. So we want to know how long you think you folks are going to be, on average, staying within your program. We also want to see what your plan is for connecting folks once they have hopefully successfully completed their diversion programming. How are they going to be connected to those ongoing services in the community, which is a really important part of making sure that they're maintaining their treatment pathways and hopefully staying out of the criminal justice system. And finally, for part of your proposed diversion plan, we want to see a program flow chart, ideally from identification of that client through that connection to ongoing services in the community that identifies different important decision points for the county and how folks are going to flow through the system, the program that you are proposing. So here we have, I did mention when I was talking about the big bubble, little bubble, we're kind of circling back to this. So we have a little table here that really is highlighting the differences between what's allowed in the bigger bubble of the penal code sections and what is allowed within our smaller DSH bubble in the WIC code. So first off, for the bigger bubble penal code sections, counties are allowed to divert individuals with either a felony or a misdemeanor charge, excluding certain charged offenses, which are all listed in this box. On the other side, under Welfare and Institution Code, our DSH program, we are only accepting and funding programs that are supporting folks who have felony charges. They can either be currently IST already found to be 1370 or who are somebody who is likely to be found IST on a felony charge. Going back over to our penal code section side on the left, the diagnoses. So as I mentioned before, much broader diagnoses are eligible under the penal code language. We have the exclusionary primary diagnoses of antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and pedophilia. But otherwise, pretty much any DSM diagnosis is fair game under the penal code. For our DSH diversion program, however, we are only funding clients who have schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or bipolar disorder. So how do you identify your potential diversion candidate? So this is taking language directly from the Welfare and Institutions Code Chapter 4361. So what we're looking at here is, first off, they're diagnosed with schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, or bipolar disorder. You're going to find that through a mental health assessment done at some point before trial, after arrest. We are looking for folks who have the potential to be found incompetent to stand trial for felony charges or have been found IST for felony charges. That's going to come through in your accusatory pleading once you're in front of a judge, or once a client, not you, once a client is in front of a judge on the pending charges. We're going to need to see there needs to be a significant relationship established between the individual's serious mental disorder and the charged offense, or between the individual's conditions of homelessness and the charged offense. This is a little bit of a grayer area and can come through different types of assessments that can be done by a clinician. It can be done simultaneously with your mental health assessment in the beginning, but we'd be looking at structured interviews, some different paper reviews, and clinical judgment to identify that nexus. And then finally, the individual should not pose an unreasonable danger to public safety. And that can be done through a risk assessment of some kind. We have a couple different webinars up on our website that we encourage you to go view that speak specifically to different types of risk assessments that are used and what can be potentially adopted by your county for your diversion program. So another key piece, once you know how you're going to identify people, how many people are you going to serve in your program? What is going to be your target population goal? So you can elect to serve any number of individuals up to the 30% population goal that was sent. You can find that in one of the attachments that went out with the RFA package. So what this is meant to say is that each county, if you were to go for your 30% goal, we would expect in this particular example that we have up here, County A, we would expect County A to serve up to 75 individuals over the course of 3 years. And that's really important. This isn't 75 people each year of the program. This is over the course of the program. So my last bullet point at the bottom of the slide here just kind of divvied it up almost evenly just to show kind of what we're talking about here. So County A's program might look a little bit like this, where they bring in 20 new people to their program in their first year. In their second year, they serve 15 additional new people who are unduplicated. And when we say unduplicated, that means they haven't already been through and admitted into this particular diversion program. And then in year 3, maybe they serve an additional 15, and that's how they get to their 75 folks, their 30% population target. So this will be important for you guys to think about when you're looking at your average length of stay, what your programming looks like, and the potential budget. So DSH will be budgeting clients at $142,000 per client, and that's the cap. So, and that is, again, funding that will also be paid out over the course of the 3 years. And I do have in a couple of slides, I will walk you through how that funding is going to be dispersed. But this is just in terms of your overall planning for your program, just understanding that this population goal and the funding that's associated with it is a 3-year goal and not a yearly goal. All right. Evaluation, treatment, and service examples. So for the part of your program plan where you're talking about the treatment and services that you're going to be providing to clients, we just listed a couple different examples of things that we've seen in other county plans or that we've discussed with other counties So like I mentioned before, there's a couple different types of risk assessments out there that you can use. We list 2 here. There are many, many more. And again, I encourage you to go to our website and check out our pre-recorded webinars on this topic. But the 2 we list here are the START and the HCR20. Those are pretty common risk assessments being used in these types of programming. We also have a couple community treatment model examples here and different types of housing that may be available in your community for these types of programs. And here, the last bullet, a couple slides ago, a sample program flowchart. We have this divvied up into 2 slides, and I apologize if it's a little blurry. We were having some issues getting the formatting to work on this slide, but this just gives you an idea of what we're looking for when we ask for a program slide. And it doesn't have to be exactly this format, but just I think the level of detail in this particular sample is really nice. So we see at the very beginning here, we're starting on the arrest on a felony charge, and then it works through kind of what's going on through the judicial process where people are getting flagged and identified as a potential candidate for this program, and how it goes in through the courts. And then I will go to our next slide where we'll pick up right at those last 2 squares there. And this one's even a little bit blurrier, but this gets you to once diversion is approved by the court, the different types of services that these folks might be sent out to. These are the services that this particular county is going to be making available to the individuals who are in their program. And then at the tail end here, we see that they're going to be updating their court regularly. We have a decision point: does a person complete diversion? Do they fail? And then what happens if they complete or fail? So this is kind of the all-inclusive type of flowchart that we're looking for in your application packages. And then budget detail. So the budget is another major component of this program. As I mentioned before, we will be funding counties at $142,000 per client total. There's also a requirement that counties provide a match of local funds if you are a large county, which means if you have a county population of more than 200,000 folks, you are required to contribute a 20% match. If your county population is under 200,000 people, then you are required to provide a 10% match. And we also anticipate that most of the counties we are working with will also be pulling down other types of funding sources, such as Medi-Cal funding, SSI, SSDI. Perhaps you have some other state or federal grants that you can use to help fund this program as well. One important note is that the Medi-Cal funding, SSI, SSDI, any other type of like state or federal grant, those cannot be used towards your county match. County match has to be local funds, and generally that is going to be your county general fund, your MHSA funding, aside from any specialty MHSA grants, and your realignment funds. So what we're going to want to see in the budget detail, and I'll have a sample here for you in just a moment, is how you're going to use our funding, how you're going to be using your county match funding, and how you're going to be using any other additional proposed funding sources. And so here is just a sample. This is a sample budget from another county, and just to give you an idea of the level of detail we're looking for, again, formatting, it doesn't have to match this template exactly, but I thought this was kind of a clean example to show you all. They're showing all of the positions that are going to be involved, the dollars that are associated with those positions, different aspects of the program that the funding is going to be paying for, all totaled out. They're showing their different offsets. They're showing their what their match is going to be. They're having, this particular county has an in-kind match that they are providing. So they just kind of neatly lay it all out with the numbers to the side. So this is, I think, a good example of what we're looking for in the level of detail we're looking for in the budget that you provide to us. So I believe this is my last slide before I turn it back over to Darcy to talk a little bit about data. just for planning purposes, for this particular program, we will disperse funding in 6 different installments to counties. The first installment is going to be 25% of the total award amount, and that's going to be for all of your implementation costs. So you don't have to have anybody in your program yet to claim these funds. All you need is a executed contract with the Department of State Hospitals for the program and a finalized version of your program plan on file with us. Once those 2 things are in place, you can invoice us for your first 25% of funds. The next 5 disbursements are going to be based on hitting certain population benchmarks of your overall population goal. So you'll see, for instance, installment 2, we will release 10% of the remaining funds to you once you have admitted and served 10% of your target population for a minimum of 30 days. And that's how all of these installments are going to work. We're looking for, again, unduplicated individuals. So if somebody gets into the diversion program, you get funded for that individual, and then for whatever reason they fail out, they come back before the 3-year pilot's over, gets put into the diversion program again, we won't count that person a second time. Every individual that counts towards your target population and the funding that gets released has to be unduplicated. We also require that they're in the program for a minimum of 30 days. The one exception is if you somehow have somebody who is in your program for less than 30 days who successfully completes diversion in that time, we will count them. We expect that that's probably an extremely rare situation if it happens at all. But if that is the case, you can just communicate with us and we'll work that piece out. But in terms of planning your 3-year budget and how money will be flowing out from us to you, this is the disbursement plan for the dollars. And so now I'll turn it back over to Darcy, and she's going to talk with you guys really quickly about our data collection, and then we will open it up for questions.
Great, thanks, Ashley. So the last piece that we're talking about is data and outcomes reporting. And so as part of the statutory language and the contract that we create with your county to ensure that the monies are being used appropriately, and also to really try to help understand how and why people are successful in diversion, there's a portion of the contract that speaks to the need for your county to provide data back to Department of State hospitals at a fairly granular level. This is going to include personally identifiable information and data related to the types of services that a person receives. And so if you are in contract with us, we will have a lot of separate meetings to talk about the data, and we really try to individualize the data reporting for each county to make it as seamless and easy for you as possible to use existing reporting structures that you have and use that to create the outcomes that we need to report up to the legislature on. And so this is a super busy slide with all of the detailed information and exactly how it's worded in statute. So it's not super helpful. If I wanted to summarize the data, we'll go to the next slide. And this provides just the basic categories of information that we will be requesting. The first being basic demographic information on the individuals who are diverted. We will also look for criminal justice related information. For example, their arresting offense, when they were arrested, and if it was a felony or misdemeanor. Information on the diversion evaluation that was conducted, right? So most counties are going to be doing eligibility evaluation. So we will ask for a few pieces of information from that evaluation. And probably the heaviest lift for the counties will be data on diversion services that the individual received. And so again, fairly granular, looking at the types of services that the person received. Did they receive housing? Did they receive visits with the psychiatrist, individual therapy, group therapy? For the most part, the counties that we're already working with on tackling this issue, there are automated reports based on current billing information. So it hopefully won't be too heavy of a lift, especially because we're only talking about a small cohort of individuals, not 50,000 who may be receiving services from your community. And ultimately their outcome of diversion, if they were able to successfully or unsuccessfully complete diversion, we're just asking for information on that. And so we talk about these outcomes, not really to go into detail during this webinar, because that's something that happens with counties once we get into contract execution phase, but really just to ensure that all counties understand that when you are accepting DSH diversion money and entering into a contract with us, there will be a reporting back of data and information that is required by statute and our contract that we will negotiate with you to, again, make it as easy as possible for your county to report that information.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left on the clock, but Darcy and I are also available to stay a bit longer if we have questions out there. Now is the time. Does anybody have any questions about the process, about the research, about the data collection, the budget, anything related to this particular program and the application? Okay, so while we're waiting to see if anybody has some questions for us, I do want to just remind you all of the timeline that we're looking at. So we have an open Q&A period that we're in right now. We've asked that all questions related to this program, if possible, be submitted to us, or about the application process, by Friday, the 27th of December, and we will post and send out responses to those questions to the entire group on, I believe it's January 3rd, the Friday after New Year's. Applications are due to us on January 31st. And then from there, our timeline is we want to move very, very quickly with this process. We will be reviewing applications in the first few weeks of February. Our goal is to notify counties by the end of the month, whether they have received an award or not. And then from that point on, we will be moving very, very quickly to get contracts reviewed by the appropriate parties in the counties and get those executed. We do need to execute contracts by July 1st of 2020 in order to have a full 3-year contract with the county for this pilot program. So spring will be kind of a fast and furious, get the contracts set up and executed so we can make that date. So I'm going to open it back up. Are there any questions out on the line for us?
Okay, so we had one question come in about whether or not we're distributing the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, so we are actually recording this video, so we will be posting this hopefully in early January for everybody who wasn't able to join us to be able to view, and we can make the slides available as well.
Great, thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if no more questions, thank you all so much for your time. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us via our email address, which we might have up on a slide. There we go. Here's the DSH diversion email address, which is dshdiversion@dsh.ca.gov. Those emails go directly to Ashley and I, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send us an email.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful afternoon and happy holidays.